Okay, hello and welcome to today's City Club of Boise virtual conversation on redistricting. I'm Sue Rentz, a founding member of City Club and longtime member of the program committee and your moderator today. I want to welcome our radio listeners on the broadcast via Boise State Public Radio, KBSX at 91.5 FM, and its affiliates throughout Southern Idaho. This program is being recorded and will also be posted on our YouTube channel. Today's forum is available for our audience in large part because of our City Club partners and sponsors. I'd like to thank these organizations that help us achieve our mission and bring together programs like this one. Our premier sponsor is Northwest Nazarene University and the NNU College of Business. Our annual sponsor is the University of Idaho. We also receive support from our forum series sponsors, AARP Idaho, Bank of Idaho, Climate Tech Corp, Echelon Group, Micron, Pacific Source Health Plans, Small Mine Development, and St. Luke's Health System. City Club of Boise also receives funding from the Idaho Humanities Council. We appreciate our media partners that include Boise State Public Radio, 670 KBOI, the Idaho Statesman, and Idaho Public Television. We appreciate our media partners that include Boise State Public Radio, 670 KBOI, the Idaho Statesman, and Idaho Public Television. Our university partners are BSU and NNU. Finally, I'd like to thank our members, both individuals and organizations who are the foundation of City Club of Boise. If you're listening today and not a member, I encourage you to join. Also, thanks to our forums committee that plans these programs, especially Betsy McBride, today's forum chair. Please remember that there's an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panel today, Wednesday, April 21st, using the Q&A function on Zoom. Just type your question and submit, or email it to morgan@cityclubofboise.org, and she will get it to me. I'll do my best to present all the questions, may group similar ones together in the interest of time. Now let's turn to our topic. Redistricting, the intersection of high-stake politics and the Idaho Constitution. According to the American Political Dictionary, the definition of redistricting is the action of a state legislature to redraw legislative electoral district lines following a new population census. That sounds straightforward. Districts need to have boundaries redrawn when populations get out of balance. This used to be done in Idaho by the legislature itself, with staff support, of course, and involved using paper maps and colored markers. We all know that having the legislature draw its own district lines is a very partisan effort, dominated by whichever party controls the legislature. One reason I think I was asked to moderate this forum is that I was in the state Senate the last time redistricting was done by the legislature in 1991. But I have a confession to make. I know very little about how the decisions on proposed boundaries were made. It was only my second year in the Senate, and I wasn't on the committee that worked on the plan. I do remember some of the results: bruised egos of incumbents who had to run against each other. That year, we had to decrease the number of seats in the Senate from 42 to 35. And there were oddly shaped districts to protect some incumbents. That's often called gerrymandering. Much has changed since that time, and for Idaho, that is a good thing. Since the mid-90s, a Citizens Commission has been charged with Idaho's redistricting due to passage of a constitutional amendment by Idaho voters in 1994. I had the good fortune to be part of the legislative group that worked on the legislation we needed to pass to implement the amendment. In the code, this section of law is actually called the Commission for Reapportionment. And for those of you that like to look it up, it's Title 72, Chapter 15. One of our speakers will later clarify this different terminology. In my discussion, I'm just going to call it redistricting to keep it simple. In reviewing the minutes of our meetings to work on this legislation, I noted that number 2 on the list of criteria that we adopted to govern the plan, quote, was, to the maximum extent possible, districts shall preserve traditional neighborhoods and local communities of interest, end quote. Thus, both in 2001 and 2011, the task of redrawing the boundaries has been done by a citizens commission. And though there was an unsuccessful attempt to modify the makeup of this commission by last year's legislature, the process remains the same this year. The commission is made up of 6 members equally divided between Republicans and Democrats and appointed in this way. 1 member is appointed by the House Speaker and 1 member by the Senate Pro Tem. 2 members are appointed respectively by the minority leaders in the House and the Senate. And then 1 member each is appointed by the chairman of Idaho's 2 largest political parties. In order to serve on this commission, one must be a registered Idaho voter, but not have served as an elected official in the last 2 years in the legislature, county level, or state party. And a member who serves cannot serve in the legislature for 5 years following redistricting. Serving on this important commission is open to all citizens who care about good government, but not to the extent that they want to run for the legislature in the near future. In this day and age, the task is aided by computer technology, so colored markers are no longer required. The state has the latest program designed to work with census data that makes redrawing the boundaries easier. To approve a plan, at least 4 of the 6 commissioners must vote in favor of the plan, so it needs bipartisan support. Within 90 days of its organization, which is done after a call of the Secretary of State, the commission must file a proposed plan for redistricting with the Secretary of State's office. This year, the timing of the commission's work has been affected by the pandemic, which has disrupted our lives in many ways. Normally, census results would be available now, but because of delays, this data may not be available to the state until September 30th. The staff who work with the commission hope the appointments can be made by sometime this summer so that members can attend training that will be available nationally. The plan that's submitted to the Secretary of State cannot be amended by the legislature, nor does the governor have veto power. A plan can be challenged by filing an action in Idaho Supreme Court. This court is the only authority that can amend or invalidate a plan once it's filed with the Secretary of State. We are fortunate today to be joined by 2 experts who will help us understand some of the issues surrounding redistricting. First, Justice Jim Jones grew up in the Magic Valley, graduated from University of Oregon before going on to law school. He served in the Vietnam War, then worked 3 years in Washington, D.C. for Idaho Senator Len Jordan. He spent 25 years in private practice in Jerome and Boise. He's been involved in redistricting issues, first as Idaho's Attorney General in the 80s, and again during his 12 years on the Idaho Supreme Court. He retired from the court as Chief Justice in 2017. For relaxation, Jim admits that he likes writing guest opinions, and he and his wife also enjoy walking in Boise, especially in Esther Simplot Park. Professor Gary Moncrief came to Boise State University after earning his PhD at the University of Kentucky and taught for 43 years here, retiring in 2019 as a university distinguished professor. He is a nationally respected expert on redistricting, has published several books on the subject, and consulted with the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Council of State Governments, and Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University. Gary has recently discovered, since he has a little more time, that he likes throwing pots on a wheel. Also, he recently became a grandfather and is looking forward to traveling soon to meet his granddaughter. Though both of our speakers have impressive titles, we are going to use first names in our discussion today just to keep it simple. First, we'll hear from Jim Jones, who will explore some of the legal and constitutional issues. Gary Moncrief will address some political issues around redistricting, and then we'll move to the Q&A segment of our program. Jim, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Sue. Well, this is a timely subject because the state legislature may try to do a little chicanery next session to influence matters. We will have the Redistricting Commission getting into gear as soon as the census data is available, so it is a timely subject. You know, when we adopted the Redistricting Commission plan to take this pretty much out of politics, it was a remarkably progressive step. It would not happen in today's legislature, no way. But I want to give you a little background on how we got here. From the time of statehood up until the early 90s, redistricting was a partisan slugfest. And I think that the parties just got tired of slugging it out and decided to go a better way. When we started this enterprise called the state of Idaho, there was one cardinal rule with regard to legislative districts. They had to follow county boundary lines. And of course, one of the reasons for that is that we had 44 counties, 44 senators, and double that number of representatives. And so county boundary lines were very important to the process. They still are. And because of that, we don't have the gerrymandering problems that a lot of other states do in setting the boundaries for their legislative districts. I mean, you can't do it. You have to keep county splits to a very minimum, but I'll get back to that in a minute. So anyway, we went the county boundary line boundaries for the legislative districts until the 1960s, when the Supreme Court made a couple of decisions that had a profound effect on what we were able to do. The court, in a couple of decisions, ruled that you had to have one man, one vote. They didn't use the best nomenclature, kind of not recognizing that women are important voters too. If I had my way, seeing how women are smarter when it comes to voting, I would have phrased it on the Supreme Court as one woman, one vote. But anyway, that's what they said. And the rule developed that all legislative districts for state legislators had to have a maximum deviation, a maximum population deviation of 10%. So if you had the midpoint, 50,000, and you moved 10% either way, that was too much. You could go 5% either way, and that fit within the 10% deviation, and that was all right. And that's what has been applied by the Idaho Supreme Court ever since. That's the key factor you have to have in a redistricting plan. No deviation in population in excess of 10%. So anyway, we didn't have any problem at first on county boundary lines. The legislature seemed to just assume that if you couldn't have any greater deviation, you certainly couldn't use county boundaries anymore. And you probably had to split counties or cut the county boundary lines in order to cobble legislative districts together. The state court said, no, you can't do that. You can't split counties any more than may reasonably be possible to comply with the U.S. Supreme Court dictate. The first case that came up in litigation on the issue was Heller v. Santa Rosa, which was filed following the 1980 census. I stepped into the Attorney General's office in January of 1983, and one of my first cases was the Heller case, which had gone through most of the litigation and was before the Idaho Supreme Court on appeal. Well, the redistricting plan presented to the court that had been adopted by the legislature had 22 county splits. Mm-hmm. And the court said, no, you can't do that. What is interesting is that the district judge up in Sandpoint had adopted a plan proposed by one of the litigants, the plaintiffs. They had proposed a plan with 33 legislative districts, with 42 Senate seats, 84 representative districts seats, and amongst the districts, there were 6 multi-member districts and 7 flotarial districts. So what you had is you made your districts. Some of them you had double the number of senators and representatives running in. And then you had this great big overall legislative district called a flotarial district that encompassed a lot of those individual districts. And it was really interesting when you get into the redistricting situation. A lot of times you can run into the law of unintended consequences. The Republicans in the legislature were scared stiff of the flotarial district plan that the Supreme Court adopted, and the Democrats were loving it. As a matter of fact, when it was implemented, it was really a dangerous plan for the Democrats. They lost percentage of representation in the legislature, and the Republicans, who feared it like hell itself, came out pretty darn good. But anyway, it was really an unwieldy situation. And everybody kind of agreed when everything shook out that it wasn't the best. And so in 1986, we amended our Constitution and we said, no more flotarial districts, multi-member districts only as a last resort. And we will have a number of individual districts that do the very least possible to cut county boundary lines. So anyway, that went into effect, and it helped. In 1990, when the census came in, there was another slugfest, but it wasn't quite as vicious, and that's about the time that Sue came into the legislature. But everybody was thinking, you know, wouldn't it be nice if we could get this out of the legislature's hands and put it in the hands of people who are maybe not beholden to any group? And so in 1994, the commission was established 2 years later, the legislature passed some legislation that set out a number of criteria to be looked at by the commission in establishing districts. One of them that made a lot of sense was traditional neighborhoods and local communities of interest. Everybody thought, well, that would be a great idea. They also said, let's not have a lot of oddly shaped districts. And people said, well, yeah, it's pretty good. Division of counties should be avoided whenever possible. Well, that complied with the Constitution. So there were a number of other things that the commission could look at in fashioning the districts. And it was set at 35 at the time, and that seemed to work out pretty good. You got rid of a few legislators, which probably didn't make them too happy, but it was a less unwieldy situation. So anyway, that went along fine. In 2000, again, the census was arrived at. A plan was developed, and the first plan or two were sent back by the Supreme Court, the Idaho Supreme Court, saying, well, you need to do a better job on this. And eventually a plan was developed. You know, the vestige of that, even after the plan was developed and implemented, there were still challenges in the Supreme Court. Well, by that time, I had gotten on the Supreme Court, and I ended up writing the first decision. The decision did not come out until 2005, well after the elections had been had, and the court handily did away with the legislative or the litigation. But in writing the decision, I probably used some inadvertent language that later came back to haunt me in the next go around. But anyway, people moved on. When the next census came about, the Reapportionment Commission got back into business. And at this time, of course, they had 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, or at least people who had been appointed by the 2 parties. And they came up with one plan, and that didn't cut the mustard. So they went back to work. What happened is that they were not able to actually resolve themselves with a 2/3 vote to adopt a plan. So they only had 90 days and didn't get it done. So the Secretary of State appointed the group again, and they took another swat at it, and that didn't work. And finally, they arrived at a plan that was really not too bad. It had 12 county boundary line splits. It preserved communities of interest. The commission went through the various criteria that they were supposed to look at under the statute, made findings of fact to support what they had done, and it looked like this was a plan that was going to work. Well, Twin Falls County was unhappy with the plan for some reason or another, so they filed a suit to get it thrown out. So anyway, the court heard the arguments and essentially said, well, there were plans submitted to the commission that had less than 12 county boundary splits. So the plan developed by the commission is unconstitutional. Essentially, what the court did is say that you have to arrive at a plan that has the absolute minimum number of county splits, regardless of any other applicable factor. You can't preserve communities of interest because that would violate the number one dictate, which is right there in the Constitution, that says that you can't split county boundary lines. Well, it doesn't necessarily use such strict language. It says a county may be divided in creating districts only to the extent it is reasonably determined by statute that counties must be divided to create senatorial and representative districts which comply with the Constitution of the United States. So you have to follow the Constitution. But there has to be an element of reasonableness. And also, it refers to a statute that creates the districts. Well, in 1994, we did away with a statute that created the districts when we went to the commission. And districts were no longer established by a legislative act, which went on the statute books. Well, 5 people on the court looked at it in different ways. 4 people, not including me, said, well, county boundary lines are the king. You got to go for the absolute bottom dollar or else the plan doesn't work. And I said, wait a minute, I've been involved in this thing for many years, and I know what the legislature intended, and I know what the constitutional amendment said. So I made a great big long dissenting opinion, which was actually longer than the majority opinion, and pointed out that, in previous years after the commission was established, and after the constitutional amendment in 1986 was adopted, plans exceeded the absolute minimum of county boundary line splits, but the other 4 people on the court didn't agree, and so there we are. And so anyway, you ended up with some of these legislative districts, like, well, the one that goes from Shoshone County all the way down to Boise County, several hundred miles, really kind of unseemly. There's one in southeast Idaho that is very lengthy. It's kind of an inverted L shape. And then one that goes from Elmore County to Lemhi County across a rather large mountain range. But it was all in the service of getting a plan that had the least splits. Okay, I can tell you one thing. We will have litigation regardless of whatever plan is developed. We can't have the kind of fighting that they have in other states about gerrymandering because of the strict ruling by the court on county boundary lines. So that might be a benefit of it. The only place where you can do a little bit of chicanery is where you have several districts inside of a county, like Ada County. And so you can try to get that rejiggered to help one party or the other, or to help some beloved incumbents resist a challenge. But that's the long and the short of it. And now I think you'll hear from somebody much more qualified, Gary Moncrief. Sometimes we go out on a dog and pony show. We've done it before, and I have a great deal of respect for him. So I think you'll enjoy him.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to keep this real short. Sue had asked me to say something about the difference between reapportionment and redistricting. I know a number of people in the audience understand that, but I'm also guessing that a number of people are not completely clear on that. Certainly that was the case of the original Redistricting Commission, because it was called the Reapportionment Commission. It was no such thing. Reapportionment and redistricting are not the same thing. Reapportionment essentially means reapportioning, that is re-divvying up, taking portions and placing it in subunits. And so the way we use reapportionment in the United States, it really refers almost always to how seats are allocated to the US House of Representatives after the census. 435 seats, that's set in legislation. 50 of those are guaranteed because each state is guaranteed one seat. So what we're talking about is fighting over 385 remaining seats. Those 385 seats are allocated on the basis of population. And after every census, there are some changes to that. And if one state gains a seat because they've had a large population increase, another state is going to lose a seat because we're set at 435. Therefore, it's a zero-sum game. And what's happened in the last 50 years or so is because the growth has been primarily in the West and the South, they have been gaining seats at the expense of the East and the Midwest in terms of House seats, US House of Representatives. This year, we are likely to see about 10 seats shift. And all of those are going to be to the West. Arizona, Colorado, Oregon, and Montana are likely to pick up a seat, or to the South. North Carolina is going to pick up a seat. Florida is likely to pick up 2 seats, and Texas is going to pick up 3 seats because of the vast growth in Texas. Those 10 seats are going to come entirely out of the Midwest and the East, with the possible exception of 1 seat losing maybe in California. That's a story for another day, which would be really interesting, given that California has never lost a seat before in its history. So that's reapportionment, basically. Idaho is not going to get a seat. A lot of people think, given the number of people on the roads here, particularly out where I live off of Eagle Road, we might be getting 3 or 4 new seats in Congress, but it's not true. We're going to be a little bit shy, I think, of getting a 3rd seat in Idaho. So in Idaho, reapportionment this time around doesn't have a lot of in-state implications. By the way, reapportionment not only affects the House of Representatives because it shifts those numbers, it also has an effect on the Electoral College, which is a story for another day. Now, redistricting. Redistricting simply means redrawing the lines within a state, either for the congressional districts within that state or the state legislative seats. And you have to redraw the lines every 10 years in order to reflect the population changes that have occurred. As Justice Jones said, there are stipulations in federal law that say basically state legislatures can have a population deviation of about 10%, about 5% from the norm or the ideal on one side, 5% on the other side. For our congressional seats, we only have 2. The congressional stipulation is that they have to have almost exactly the same number of people. There's not a 10% rule there. It has to be virtually the same in each district. District 2, which is the east side, basically from Boise East, that district is going to be around 80 to 90,000 people short of what's going to be in District 1. The reason for that, of course, is because most of the population growth has been in Kootenai County, Canyon County, and Ada County. And most of the growth in Ada County has been outside of the city of Boise, specifically Meridian, Eagle, Kuna, etc. So what we're going to have to see there is a shifting of that congressional district line, probably further to the west, maybe to the southwest a bit. It's going to have to shift about 40 or 45,000 people out of CD1 and into CD2 in order to balance that out. So that's where the political fight will be on the commission this time around for Congress. State legislatures is a different thing. 35 districts. We have to redraw the lines in those 35 districts in order to reflect the substantial population changes that have occurred. In the last redistricting round, we had an ideal population per legislative district of around 45,000. I think it was 44,700, something like that. Plus or minus about 2,000 on each side for the 5%. This time around, because of the population growth in the state, it's going to be around 52,000. That means a district can go as high as maybe 54 49,500, as low as 49,000, something along those lines. So those are going to be the parameters, basically 49 to 55, roughly speaking, is going to be the parameters. Right now, by my count, we have about 21 or 22 districts that are already outside those parameters. That is, they are too low, they don't have enough people, or they are too high. The most dramatic example is District 14, which is Eagle, North Meridian, Star. That district, by my calculation, probably has 73,000 people in it now, 70, or at least 70,000 people. So there's going to be a lot of challenge for this commission to make those kinds of changes to get the districts back into conformity. And as Jim mentioned, the challenge includes this issue of maintaining county boundaries. I don't see any way that Ada County does not gain at least one seat out of this, this new redistricting, because the county has grown over 100,000 people since the last one. I'll leave it at that, see what kind of questions we have.
Okay, I'm going to start with one question to you, Gary. Can you, off the top of your head, give us an example of a district that is too small to, I mean, it's under 49,000, so probably needs to have voters added to it.
Yeah, I can give you a lot of examples.
Okay, give us several examples.
Okay, districts, some of these are in the north, District 6, District 7, District 8, District 9. All of those are north of Canyon County. Most of those are kind of in the central part of the state. Rural areas, basically. Most of those areas have not grown sufficiently to still be, basically a district had to grow about 5,000 or 6,000 just to keep up.
Right.
And those districts did not. In the southeast side of the state, there's a lot of those districts, 23, 26, 27, 29, 31, 33, 35. Those are, again, these are estimates. If we had time, I could explain to you how I came up with these numbers, but those are the districts that I think are low. And also in this area, District 22 is probably a little bit light, and District 15 and probably 17. So most of the districts that are light are going to be to the east of us or to the north of us. The southwest part of the state doesn't have a few, but not a lot of districts that are light. They have a lot of districts that are heavy, that is, that have too many people now.
Right. I don't have my legislative directory with me, but just for the audience to know, when Gary's talking about District 6, 7, 8, and 9, those tend to be the cities that, I mean, they're both cities, but also the rural areas surrounding Lewiston and Moscow. That's kind of generally that. District
Right.
12, I mean, 22, when you talked about that, what's the main, either the county or city that is?
22, I think that's Ada County. It's in Ada County, but it's the southern part of this county. I think it's south of Meridian.
Right, so it's Cuna.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or maybe southeast of there. That's one of the few. 15 is the other one, and that's right in the heart. 15 is the district that has kind of swung back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. It's
right.
It's the district basically south of Chinden and Eagle Road. Yeah.
Right. And you can understand why that district hasn't grown is because it doesn't have excess land in the district.
That's exactly right. That district has stayed about the same because it's already filled in.
Right. Most of the other districts have some portion of them that is in the outlying part of Boise or in rural Ada County where there's been a lot of growth. Okay. Exactly. And then the 20s are basically Magic Valley, and then as you go on over to the east. Correct. Okay, great. We have one question that has come in, and this one is just this is just a straightforward one. District 18 includes the prison. Does the population of voters include the prisoners?
Jim, you want to take that?
I guess I can. I haven't really looked at it, but I don't know why it wouldn't. The census counts undocumented individuals, people that can't vote for one reason or another. So I can't see why it wouldn't include prisoners.
There's a litigation on this in a lot of states about whether prisons ought to be included or not. And to be honest, I don't know I don't know where that stands in Idaho. I believe they are currently counted in that district.
Okay. Great. There's also, this question came in from somebody who registered for the forum before our discussion even started. The statute, one of the standards is the thing about not dividing counties. Does that also apply to where the congressional district boundary gets established?
Well, it's kind of a weird situation because the constitutional provision that limits county boundary splits does not apply to the congressional, the federal candidates. Now, but you know, the Supreme Court's, the Idaho Supreme Court's essentially nullification of the statute with regard to redistricting does not apply to the congressional districts. So the statute, as it says, you should avoid wherever possible dividing counties. It's not a hard and fast rule under the statute. So under the statute, which does apply to congressional districts, you have to look at all of the criteria laid out, communities of interest, avoiding unseemly shaped, oddly shaped districts. But the criteria is so, you know, well, it doesn't have a lot of teeth in it. So I'm not sure you would see the commission, you know, doing detailed examination of how those criteria are affected. I think they were drafted primarily for state districts.
Yeah, ultimately, federal judicial decisions are going to hold sway over the state judicial decisions anyway. And the feds have been very clear that you can have virtually no variation between the population in one congressional district compared to another, unlike state legislative districts. And because of that, I think they would be ill-served to try to keep county boundaries intact as the primary consideration, though we'll certainly have a lawsuit filed, and I suspect they would lose it. We already know something. I mean, Ada Canyon is split right now.
Right. Well, and there's no, when you look at the map of the entire state, there's really no way to balance the population between the first congressional district and the second congressional district without putting parts of Ada County in each district, because it just gets too out of whack if you put all of Ada County into either one.
And as a practical matter, you know, the districts are pretty much on county boundary lines. They just use Ada County and now I think Canyon County to kind of rejigger them to the right proportions.
Right. Yeah, you know, that one question came in that it's really good, Gary, that you clarified between redistricting and reapportionment. One of our viewers asked, will the name of the commission be renamed to redistricting? And if not, why not?
Well, it should be, because reapportionment is a bit of a misnomer. It's, you know, the truth is so many people use that when they mean redistricting that in the public's mind, the two are synonymous, I think.
Right.
But they really aren't synonymous at all.
I think the problem you have is when you write your essay in indelible ink, you can't change the answer. So you'd have to have an amendment to the Constitution to change the name. And I don't know that it would be worth it.
Right. The thing is that everybody I know who talks about the subject refers to it as the redistricting commission, because that's essentially what they're doing. And we know what we're talking about. We just kind of ignore the title of that chapter and what was proposed. Do you think the effort that was made last year would have added a 7th member to the commission? And do you think that that proposal might come up again? Obviously, we know that it wouldn't affect elections until after the 2030 census.
Well, it certainly may come up again. And you're right, it wouldn't go into effect for 10 years. So my guess is if it comes up, it's probably going to be down the road. I would argue that the commission, the way it works now, is just fine. I would point out that most states do have an odd number, but in most states that have an odd number, that 7th person or 9th person or whatever it is on that commission, that person is actually chosen by the other commissioners.
Right.
And so it keeps the kind of bipartisan tone to it. Also, I was prepared if this did pass this year, I was prepared to argue that the people that are actually left out of this system are unaffiliated voters in Idaho, because Republicans get to choose half of the commission, Democrats get to choose half of the commission, and unaffiliated voters, which are about 30% of the entire population in the state of Idaho, or voter population, they don't get to choose anybody. And increasingly, commissions have recognized that problem. There are 6 states now, all of which have done this within the last 10 years, that include unaffiliated voters on the commission at this point.
Okay, and when Gary says unaffiliated voters often refer to themselves as independents.
Yeah.
That is, they don't declare and they don't vote in the primary for either the Democrats or Republican. That's a really important, I mean, that's a really important insight.
And this is within the last 10 or 12 years. In 2018, I believe it was, there were 4 or 5 states that adopted unaffiliated voters on their commissions just in that one electoral period.
Wow,
so
that's interesting.
People are recognizing that the parties shouldn't get to control the whole process.
Right. That's a very, very good point. You know, I might mention that when the committee was drafting the legislation that implemented the constitutional amendment that created the Citizens Commission, we actually wanted, I would say, we didn't have a vote on it, but I would say probably a majority of our committee, which was 6 people, we really wanted to have a 7th member appointed, chosen by the committee. So it would continue to reflect a bipartisan nature. And there'd have to be agreement because 4 out of the 6 would have to agree on that person. But we asked for an Attorney General's opinion about whether we could do that. And we were told that we couldn't because of the language in the constitutional amendment. So I think if we wanted to get a 7th member, it would require, well, and we know all the proposals that have been made about that actually are constitutional amendments.
Right.
So,
and as I said, that is the most common way to do it, is to have an odd number with that tiebreaker, if you will, has to be agreed upon by the other members of the commission.
Right. Okay, good. We've had a clarification from the person who asked the question about the prison. And this person says that their question actually is there statutory authority that prevents the Redistricting Commission from using that, the Idaho, those at the prison to geoblock based on addresses of those people pre-incarceration? So I think it's asking the question of whether prisoners might be getting counted twice. Do either of you want to take that on?
Actually, I think what it's asking is whether you can have them counted in their home, their place of original residence rather
Right.
than the prison. And I know that a number of states have in fact done that. I'm sure there's litigation working through the federal courts. I'm not familiar with that litigation though.
Yeah,
Jim?
I can't shed any light on it. I haven't looked at it.
Okay, great. Here's another, this is just, do you have a crystal ball? Is there a chance that redistricting might not happen before next year's primary because of the delay in the census figures?
I would say the chances are slim. If the numbers come out in, let's say, late August or September, the commission meets in October, they would have until the end of December to have something done. The question really is, can the commission get it done? If they were unable to come up with a plan like occurred, as Jim mentioned last time around, I could see it pushing down the road some. Jim?
Yeah, I think that's true. And you can bet that there's going to be litigation on it. It's going to be challenged. That's going to take a while. So I think from a practical standpoint, it's going to be really difficult to have one in place next year for the 2022 election.
What would that mean then? What happens?
I think you'd just keep the legislative districts as they are now. And then the new plan would go into effect in 2 more years.
In the next election cycle. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, someone did ask this question, and we do know what the Census Bureau has said. When do we expect to have the latest census data? It has been promised by an absolute deadline of September 30th of this year. There is a chance that it will come in earlier, but we know it will be no later than September 30th. That is a lot later than it has been in prior years. This is a question about the biggest point of contention appears to be more urban-rural splits than partisan. Our current legislature has been characterized as perhaps the most dysfunctional in years. Will the redistricting help make the legislature more functional in future years? And do you expect that the partisan split will remain about the same?
Well, I certainly wouldn't bet against it becoming as dysfunctional as it is now. That goes well beyond redistricting. There are so many other issues going on there. What was the other part of that question? What was the last part of it, Sue?
The other part was, do you expect the partisan split to remain about the same?
I do. I expect it to stay roughly the same. Democrats are actually underrepresented in the legislature if you look at the percentage of vote they get in statewide elections. But this is really common in the way elections are done in the United States, which tend to be single-member district elections. And in those cases, the majority party almost always winds up with an even greater majority in the legislature than they have in the statewide vote. And for Democrats in particular, there's a structural disadvantage in the way the system works in elections in the US because Democratic votes tend to be so concentrated in urban areas so that all of you can draw a district in an urban area that might be 80% for the Democrats, whereas in the rural areas, Republicans might be winning 55% or 60%. So Democrats are almost always underrepresented in terms of the legislative seats compared to the population. And there's really not much fix to that if you keep the kind of districting system that we have in the United States.
Jim, do you want to weigh in on that one?
How I can't get dysfunctional legislature off of my mind. This is the worst I've ever seen. I don't see that there's going to be much change in the makeup. It's interesting. We're getting, at least this is not based on any survey, it's just anecdotally, but I think across the state, we're getting about equal numbers of people who are Republicans and Democrats. You know, we've attracted people across the board. Some of the people coming to Boise are with the tech firms, younger people that probably are inclined to the Democrat side, and then up north, particularly in Kootenai County and on north, you're getting a lot of people of the Republican persuasion. So I think you're getting both. So it probably is going to stay pretty much the same.
Okay, and somebody from Legislative Services must be a part of the Zoom call, because we've just received one message that says that that office that facilitates the commission's work has asked for a filing deadline extension for next year. So
okay.
That's also one of the things that might be happening. One question or a comment that's been filed, it says that once a county is split, that it can be split multiple times. So is that your understanding, that once it's been split, that county might be split several times?
See, Ada counties.
Because Ada County does do that. Okay.
But there's an allowance for counties that have more than one for counties that have more than one legislative district. I think you still have to, if you can, keep the splits to a minimum.
Right, right.
That's kind of the way the court looked at it back 10 years ago.
Okay. I might just mention one other thing, is that when you look at the criteria for what governs the redistricting, the committee that worked on that legislation put communities of interest really high on that list. The only thing that's higher is the census figures. And we had a discussion about that, and it was that we thought that was really the most important of the criteria. But like Jim says, the Constitution kind of trumps statute when it comes down to that.
There was somebody in that decision who wrote that there was apparently a prioritization.
Yeah, but he didn't get listened to. Last question. Sometimes Idaho is the last to adopt more progressive proposals. Why do you think that we had a constitutional amendment to create a citizens commission in ‑93? Kind of.
I think if we hadn't had the trauma of the flotarial districts and multi-member districts, it probably wouldn't have happened, but it was, I think, a real illustration of the difficulty under the political slugfest kind of arrangement. And I think we had some leaders in the governor's office and the legislature that said, let's do something else.
Right. And I might mention the leaders in the legislature at the time was current Representative Mike Simpson was Speaker of the House, and the pro tem were Jerry Twiggs, who's just one of the, they both were outstanding leaders. And so I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank our speakers. I might mention that City Club awarded the Idaho Citizens Reapportionment Commission, even if that's misnamed, the Stimson Award in 2012 for their work on the last redistricting plan. And with that, this forum is over. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.